On September 11, 2001, the world watched in horror as the United States was attacked. As the smoke cleared and the dust settled, the U.S. government quickly pointed the finger at one man, Osama bin Laden, leader of the terrorist group, Al-Qaeda. They believed he was being sheltered inside the country of Afghanistan by the ruling regime. Soon after, American and Allied forces began what they would call Operation Enduring Freedom. And by the end of the year, the ruling regime had collapsed, and U.S. forces moved into major cities. Bin Laden, however, had escaped across the border into the rugged Pakistani mountains. What was expected to be a short operation quickly stretched into 20 years. But first, let's take a step back. On September 11, 2001, almost no one in the U.S. had heard of Afghanistan or its ruling regime, the Taliban. Over the next few weeks, though, Americans learned that this small Afghanistan is a very difficult place to wage war. Most of the fighting has taken place in the countryside where there are few roads and the terrain is extremely rugged. Even today, some parts of the country can only be reached by foot or helicopter. The Afghan people also live in very close quarters. Homes are usually built right up against each other. This makes it difficult for soldiers to maneuver through towns without accidentally damaging civilian homes. Also gives enemy forces the perfect place to hide. All these factors made it extremely dangerous for U.S. soldiers who had to be constantly on guard for an ambush or attack. By 2003, the U.S. had deployed over 20,000 troops to Afghanistan. They were joined by soldiers from NATO and other allied countries. Despite the large number of troops, the war was still not going well. The U.S. military was unable to find Osama bin Laden or any of the senior members of Al-Qaeda. In 2004, the situation in Afghanistan took another turn for the worse. A series of bombings and assassinations killed hundreds of people. The U.S. blamed the government, but the group denied responsibility. Tensions between the U.S. and Afghanistan rose even higher in 2005, when President Hamid Karzai accused the U.S. of supporting the Taliban. He claimed that the U.S. was providing the Taliban with weapons and training. The U.S. denied the allegations, but they were never able to fully disprove them either. Throughout the early years of the war, the U.S. struggled to make progress against the Taliban. The group was able to blend in with the local population, which made it difficult for the U.S. military to distinguish them from civilians. Additionally, the Taliban had a strong network of informants, which allowed them to avoid U.S. surveillance. Despite the challenges, the U.S. military made some progress against the Taliban. By the end of 2006, the group had been driven out of most of the major cities. However, the leading group continued to launch strikes from their strongholds in the rural areas. In 2007, the U.S. military launched a major offensive against the leading group. The goal was to drive the group out of their rural strongholds. The offensive was successful in inflicting heavy casualties on the leading group. However, it also resulted in a large number of civilian casualties. This caused tensions to rise between the U.S. and the Afghan people. Many Afghans saw the civilian casualties as a result of U.S. carelessness, rather than a necessary part of war. Despite the setbacks, the U.S. military continued to fight the Taliban. In 2010, the U.S. and NATO forces launched a major offensive against the Taliban in the Helmand province. The goal was to secure the area and provide stability to the region. Once again, the offensive was successful in inflicting heavy casualties on the leading group. However, it also resulted in a large number of civilian casualties. This led to protests and violence against U.S. and NATO forces throughout Afghanistan. Amidst all this chaos, news broke in May of 2011 that Osama bin Laden had been killed in a raid by U.S. Navy SEALs in Pakistan. As the war dragged on, the U.S. military began to realize that the government was not the only danger they were facing. There was also a growing insurgency within the Afghan army itself. Soldiers were deserting their posts and joining the government. Others were simply refusing to fight. This was happening for a number of reasons. Many soldiers were not properly trained and did not know how to fight in an insurgency. Others were corrupt and were more interested in looting than fighting. Still others were simply too afraid to fight. They had seen what happened to their comrades and did not want to be killed or injured. Whatever the reason, the desertion and refusal to fight was creating a major problem for the U.S. military. It was clear that if something did not change, the conflict would never be won. In 2013, the U.S. military began a major effort to train and equip the Afghan army. This included providing new equipment, weapons, and body armor. The U.S. also began to focus on winning the hearts and minds of the Afghan people. This involved working with local leaders to provide them with the services they needed, such as schools, hospitals, and roads. At the same time, the U.S. military continued their mission. Major battles were fought across the country, and thousands of lives were lost on both sides. In 2016, the U.S. military announced that it had killed or captured almost 60,000 insurgents. However, it was clear that the war was still far from over. By 2020, the ruling group had launched a major offensive. They were hitting hard U.S. and Afghan forces across the country. It was clear that the U.S. could not continue, struggling to keep up with the relentless attacks. Forever. Something had to change. In February of 2021, the U.S. and the ruling group signed a peace agreement. The terms of the agreement were not made public, but it is believed that the Taliban agreed to a ceasefire. In exchange, the U.S. agreed to withdraw all of its troops from Afghanistan. After 20 years of war, this was music to the ears of most Americans. On August 30th, 2021, the last U.S. plane took off from Afghanistan, ending America's longest war. It wasn't the ending that anyone had expected. Now that the U.S. had left, it didn't take long for the ruling group to seize control of the country. Within days, they had taken over all major cities and the government. Thousands of people fled the country, and the U.S. was left with a small number of people who had been left behind. Was the war a win or a loss? You decide. But there's no denying that the war had a major impact on the world. It led to the deaths of thousands of innocent people and cost the U.S. trillions of dollars. Ultimately, though, the war may have been unavoidable. On September 11, 2001, the United States was attacked by terrorists. And in the aftermath of that attack, the U.S. had to take action. The U.S. went to war in Afghanistan, and for 2 decades, American soldiers fought against the Taliban and other insurgent groups. The war was costly in terms of lives and money, but it was ultimately a success. The leading group was defeated, and Afghanistan is now a free country. What do you think? Let me know your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching. See you next time.